Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mrs. G Storytime. We are reading the book Betsy Ten Boom, Promise of God, by Mike Evans, with permission from Time-Worthy Books, and we are on chapter 39. The next morning, I was the first to awaken. As I did when I arrived the night before, I rolled up my sleeping mat, stood it in the corner, and sat in front of it, using it as a cushion to rest my back against the wall. A chill ran through my body, and I pulled my coat tightly around me, then jammed my hands into the pockets, my mind lost in the thoughts of how cold it was and how awful it was to be there. From somewhere in my mind, I remembered a morning when I was a child, and I complained of cold at breakfast, and Papa said, "Cold winters make the fruit trees more bountiful in the summer. Aren't you thankful for fresh fruit?" I was, of course, and he said, "Then you should be thankful for the cold that makes it possible." With the room quiet, I whispered a prayer of thanks for the solitude the cell afforded, for the 3 new friends I'd made the night before, and for the change of direction in my life. Then I recited scripture from memory and prayed, following the pattern we'd used every morning at home. I had to force myself to do it. As I did, I found myself no longer bound by circumstance. My spirit came alive, and my mind soon followed. An hour later, a slot in the door opened, and a dirty metal tray appeared. On it were 4 bowls of gray porridge. Helen and Nell were awake by then. They both hungrily grabbed for the tray. I took one of the bowls and set it on the floor beside me. Then Helen took 2 and carried them to her corner. When she sat down to eat, I said, "Isn't one of those for the lady on the cot?" "Look at her," Helen replied with a nod towards the cot. "Does she look hungry to you? She's not going to eat." "She might if we help her," I suggested. "I'm not helping her do anything," Helen scowled. I took a sip from my bowl and crawled over to Helen and retrieved the extra bowl from beside her. "Hey," she protested, "what do you think you're doing?" "If you won't help her, I will." Then I stood beside the cot and gently nudged the woman awake. She was groggy and obviously ill, but I coaxed her into eating, and she sipped almost half the contents of the bowl. When we were finished eating, I noticed a bucket in the corner opposite where I'd been sleeping the night before. It was black with a wire handle and a smooth round piece of wood for a lid. I pointed to it and said, "What's that?" "The crapper." Helen chuckled. Then her face turned serious and she looked me in the eye. "When the time comes, you'll be glad you have it." I didn't want to think about that, so I returned to my place in the corner. In a little while, the door to our cell opened and 2 guards appeared. One of them picked up the tray with the 4 bowls. The other handed us each 2 squares of tissue, and I realized it was our daily ration for the sanitary bucket. Prison life was more real than anything I'd ever imagined. Reducing the day to the simplest body functions, eat, sleep, defecate, and all of it in the environment devoid of privacy. Before the guards left our cells, they also collected Nell and took her with them. She protested, and I joined her in asking for an explanation, but they ignored our pleas. When she was gone, Helen lay on her mat and closed her eyes. I assumed she was asleep, but watching her led my eye to the woman lying on the cot, and suddenly I had the strong urge to pray for her. So I rose from my place in the corner, knelt by the cot, and placed my hand gently on the woman's arm. Then I began to pray. It was a short prayer, but to the point, asking that she would be healed. When I finished, I stepped back to the corner and took a seat. "You think that stuff works?" Helen asked abruptly. "Prayer? Yeah. You think people actually get healed from it?" "They get healed from God," I explained. "Prayer is just asking Him to act." "So," she continued, "if you ask, He'll come at your beck and call and do whatever you want?" "Not exactly," I replied with a smile. "Right," she said with a snarl tone. "That's what people always say. God will act, and then He doesn't, and you cover it by saying He isn't your own private genie. He's not, and I'm not covering for Him. I'm covering for my lack of understanding." Her eyes were open by then, and she was looking straight at me. "What does that mean?" The powerful prayers are the ones we say when we ask God to do what He already wants to do, specifically. Not just general prayers for the world, or shopping list of things we want, but when we hear Him tell us what He wants us to do, and we ask Him to do it, those are the prayers that have the most effect. "So you think He wants to heal her?" Yes, I nodded. That's what I think I heard. Well, she sighed, closed her eyes. I reckon we'll find out if it works. No, I corrected. We'll find out if I heard rightly. In a little while the door opened and Nell returned. Her cheeks were bruised and red, her lips cut and swollen. She had a scrape along her forehead, but she was smiling triumphantly as they shoved her into the cell. I stood and slipped my hand around her shoulder. What happened? They offered to set me free if I became a prostitute to their officers. And you refused? Yes, she nodded. I refused. I told them I was a Christian now, and I don't live that life anymore. Her face was radiant as I helped her to the corner. Last night, while we were praying, Jesus saved me. She eased down to the sitting position. I rolled up her mat and stuffed it behind her. Then she leaned against it and looked up at me. They tried to make me deny it, but I stood up to them. I didn't get angry. I didn't scream and curse. I remembered something they told us at church when I was younger about Jesus being crucified between two thieves and how he said, "Forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." So I kept telling myself that. I sat down beside her and she looked over at me. The tone of her voice turned serious and she said, "The guards are so blind to evil, they can't even see it has them in its grip." I chuckled to myself. It took me a lifetime to learn that simple lesson, and here she had learned it in only a single day. "Hush!" Helen snapped, interrupting us with a glare. "They're standing right outside the door. They'll hear every word you say." "I don't care if they hear me," Nell replied, lifting up her chin to strike a defiant pose. "They need to hear me." "Well, I care," Helen insisted. "If you get in trouble, we'll all get in trouble." And she shook her head in disbelief, and her voice took a mocking tone. "I can't believe you're so stupid to take a beating like that over a prayer that you prayed with her." And she gestured towards me. "It wasn't just a prayer," Nell argued. "Jesus has really made a difference in me." "Are you crazy?" Helen lifted up both hands in a gesture to our surroundings. "Look around you. Everything has changed." "I've changed." "Well, all I want to know," Helen continued, "is whether they need any more prostitutes. I'll go right now. Anything to get out of this cell and away from you, too." I looked over at Nell and our eyes met. An irrepressible grin spread over our faces and we said together playfully, "Forgive her. She doesn't know what she's saying." Now that was a short chapter, but it was a powerful one, and just for us to remember. But next week it'll be chapter 40. I love you, I'm praying for you, and bye-bye for now.